Okay, welcome back to Cool Club's headquarters. We are here with Matt Powell. He is I'm going to say, he's a club builder, master club builder, but he is our front of house guy. He deals with the emergency builds, but also tour guys and our VIPs. Give us a little insight into your day-to-day role at the front, and then we'll dive a little deeper into some club building.
Yeah, it's kind of the same as being in the main build shop and back, but more one-on-one with customers walking in, like you were saying. I'll see set builds from Mark Timms, and going off of the build file versus people coming in. They have a broken shaft that needs a minor adjustment or something along those lines. But tour players, they fall on the lines as far as going off of the main build sheet, or they come in, let's test out these two shafts. We can put those in two different driver heads just to see which one feels the best for them. It Every build is just catered towards the individual for walk-ins. It's communication with them, figuring out what they want versus a set file meeting certain parameters off of that build. And you kind of have to be a little bit of a fitter at the same time, working up front and those conversations with customers walking on off the street, and almost especially with putters, somebody wanting a lie adjustment, instead of putting them in our our putting studio, I'll just kind of eyeball them, get comfortable where your hands at address to see if we need to go a little flatter, a little upright, how far the putter is in their stance versus back, if we need to add or subtract a loft. It's everything is kind of a judgment call on walk-ins and figuring out also budget for customers, peering shafts, and just kind of getting an idea where they're at, how much they want to invest in their clubs. Yeah, and just a lot of communication with them.
So let's use an example. You get a tour pro coming in. I mean, a lot of these guys have been with us for years, and they have a specific, our Cool Club's S3 files. You can see previous builds that you've done for them. You can see the flexes that you've used, how much you've tipped, for instance, the weight of the golf shaft, length, layers of tape. Like we basically keep a catalog of all that information. So if this guy comes in, he's like, "Hey Matt, I want a replica set of these irons." Just talk us about a little bit of a process of, like, just for irons at this point. What do you do from point one? Like, you can see the build. Talk us through your process. Like, how do you get that from raw product to finished product?
Working with a tour player, and perfect example like that, will first go off of his old file, and if he's changing completely different heads from, like, let's say Callaways, for example, to Titleist, head weights could be thrown off a little. So that could determine if he's using, let's say, 120 gram shafts. We went straight in on the Callaways. Let's say those heads were a little heavier, and he's going to Titleist irons, which are a little lighter. We might want to soft step those 120 shafts
Okay.
so we can duplicate that same frequency. But that's soft stepping essentially is
Let's go down that road because people go, straight in,
okay.
soft step. Let's just give people a raw definition real quick. Straight in, soft step, hard step.
Yeah, 7 iron. You go to a manufacturer's website. They have dedicated shafts. So a dedicated shaft is a 7 iron shaft meant for a 7 iron head in a set, and they have 3 iron shafts, 4 iron shafts for those particular heads. Some manufacturers will double up your 9 iron and pitching wedge shafts that can be duplicated for either of those heads. Other manufacturers have a specific 9 iron shaft and a specific pitching wedge shaft. So essentially, straight in would be 7 iron shaft for 7 iron head.
Yeah.
Soft stepping would be a 6 iron shaft for a 7 iron head. And the opposite, we could put an 8 iron shaft and a 7 iron head.
So that makes the product stiffer than it's designed to be.
Essentially, and the opposite when soft stepping, it just makes that shaft perform a little softer, really to dial in frequency for that customer. So head weight for individual irons can make a huge impact on frequency when we're trying to dial that in.
So your example is Callaway headweight is generally speaking heavier than Titleist. So then you say, okay, well, a heavier product on the end of a shaft is going to soften the shaft, or at least soften how the shaft plays a little, and you might make the judgment call to get the same frequency as a previous build, or what the player likes to feel. You're going to have to use a hard stepped product to make it
Absolutely.
work.
Yeah, we'll encounter that often with tour players because their hands and feel are a lot more sensitive than amateur golfers, and they can tell the difference between typically soft stepping and hard stepping on average. zero point 0.5 CPMs, we'd consider that half a flex. So if we're soft,
Five CPMs.
0.5 CPMs, let's say, is half a flex. So if you have a stiff flex, let's say a 6.0, extra stiff flex is 7.0. In general relationship, that 0.5 half a flex. If you're soft stepping either direction or hard stepping, we're looking at 0.2 to 0.3 of a flex.
Yeah.
So close to about a quarter of a flex, you can influence it doing one or the other, hard stepping or soft stepping.
And linking this to your, I'll say average Joe, or people that are messing with golf clubs day to day, they might have a set that they really love, and they go to pull the shafts out and glue them into a new set of heads. That issue could arise. They all of a sudden the feel becomes stiffer, or the feel might become softer depending on that head weight. So it's definitely something to look out for.
And on top of that, length too, because hosel depths.
Right.
Certain irons, the hosel could be longer or shorter. So
the insertion that shaft's going into the head.
Pulling a set of shafts out of a set of Callaways, putting them into Titleist, yeah, it could change frequency off of head weight too, stiffer or softer, but that set could come out longer or shorter going in from one club to the other.
Yeah. They're completely different changes there.
And then we can...
and then lie angles are knock on from length. You're going to have to adjust that. So you
Exactly.
really do need an expert to kind of look at all those
On
things.
top of that, we could even throw in hosel size. You talk parallel tips versus taper tips. We might need to use shims or ream out hosels if we are putting parallel shafts into taper hosels.
Okay.
And if we're working with graphite, sometimes we can not necessarily pencil down, but file or like sand down the tip to where it's a nice smooth taper tip versus a parallel.
Okay. So now you've got your concept. You've decided on what shaft, flex, what dedicated iron you're going to use for this pro set. You know that the heads are a certain type. Where do you go from here? And I'm pushing you here to go, okay, I'm going to weigh X, Y, Z, and you give us your process.
So once we establish shafts, everything, we'll talk about length, if they're currently happy with that length, and how that can affect swing weight. And going back to heavier and lighter heads, we can add tip weights to the heads. If they're doing graphite, we're kind of limited on how heavy we can make that head. If you're starting with a lighter head, 4 gram tip weights, that's going to equate to 2 swing weight points. And tour players are switching to graphite. You're seeing a lot more of that now with the quality of graphite iron shafts. So if we're reshafting a set of clubs with steel, we can get up to 10-gram tip weights. So that could be an equivalent of 5 swing weight points plus or minus, versus graphite at 2 swing weight points.
So you're really confined. There's only so much you can do with certain products.
And some golfers, tour players, like their clubs really heavy. Most of the time that is the case, heavier versus lighter.
Higher speed guys, they want to feel where the club is a little more.
Feel a lot more of that. So
this is when you see lead tape flying around, and
yeah, a lot of lead tape. Which lead tape is actually really good because you're keeping the CG, center of gravity, as low as possible.
And you can manipulate exactly where you want that weight.
Put it on the toe for fade bias, heel for draw bias, and lead tape, I think, is wonderful. So a lot of people don't like the aesthetics, the looks of it on the back of the club, but it's probably the most beneficial if you are going to weight your irons.
And you can hot melt certain irons now that have got the toe ports in them.
Exactly.
But you can't be quite as specific as positioning a piece of lead.
And you can really dial in hot melting. You can do it. It would be one of those things I would do before you start the build. Hot melt the heads individually versus assemble the set and then.
Just a nail that they've got 7 grams or 6 gram increments between.
Exactly.
So once you've got these products, you're gonna weigh all the golf shafts to make sure that they're within a gram tolerance, or maybe even less.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll weight sort the shafts. If we've got a set of, let's say, 120 gram shafts again, there could be a tolerance, even though that shaft says 120 on it. Some of them might be 118, some of them might be 121 grams. So if we're doing 4 through pitching wedge, after we weight sort lightest to heaviest, we're going to put the lightest shaft in the 4-iron and progressively get to the heaviest shaft in the pitching wedge.
Well, just give us an idea. Why would you do that?
The 4-iron, that's going to be your lightest head in the set. Your pitching wedge is the heaviest, and you'll progressively see around 7 grams in between your irons until you get to your wedges. That's closer to 4 to 5 grams. So the lighter shaft with a lighter head is going to essentially kind of equal the same CPM if you have the same weighted shafts throughout the set versus the heaviest shaft and the heaviest iron head. And if we're trying to shoot for like a 6.0 frequency, if we were to put one of the lighter ones on the heavy heads, that could bring that frequency down a little, closer to maybe like 5.6.
So there's a direct correlation between the weight of the shaft and its CPM, its flex, it's butt flex basically. The heavier the product, the less bending you're going to receive.
Yes. So yeah, it's one of those things we can kind of control it. If we're working with graphite and we are tipping shafts to control frequency, we're removing mass. So we will see a descending frequency. So your 4-iron could start going back to the 6.0 frequency. That's the number we're going to try and shoot for. We might start at around 6.3 and seeing we're removing mass by tipping all those graphite shafts. With the pitching wedge, it could end around maybe 5.5, which is something that you really can't control unless you're going with constant weight graphite shafts, with a lot of manufacturers are making now, where the shaft's already been tipped and you still have that 120 gram shaft all the way through 4 through pitch, where if we're tipping blank shafts, by the time we get to the pitching wedge, we could have removed maybe up to 7 to 10 grams, depending on how much we've tipped it. Now that 120 gram shaft could be 108 grams if it was a lighter one or something.
So let's just give the listener, some people are going to be versed on this and not. A blank shaft or a parallel shaft, a .370 tip, generally speaking, might be a 41-inch length.
Correct.
And you'll have a set of 7 irons for the pitching wedge, and every shaft is 41 inches, and you trim from the tip or the butt to get your length and your flex. Whereas a dedicated set, they come in at progressively declining lengths. So you might start with 39.5, 38, 39, 38.5, 38, and you end up with the same weight golf shaft all the way through your set, which I think as club builders, we know that is probably a better option for most people.
To keep the frequency the same throughout the set. Absolutely.
You get your weight of your shaft the same, you get your frequency the same. It's a really nice marriage, whereas we've always learned from original graphite, that there was a trade-off. There was that balance point would change as the golf club would change, and we don't know if there's detrimental or not, but there is definitely a difference there from a 4-iron product to a pitching
wedge. Yeah. And going back to the different length shafts, that's kind of where the hard stepping, soft stepping would fall in. 38.5 shaft versus a 37-inch shaft could be in your pitching wedge. And some manufacturers, their pitching wedge shafts are only 35 inches.
Makes it hard to make a longer
exactly
pitching wedge product.
So we'll encounter that with some shafts. If somebody wants to build a set of clubs that are, let's say, an inch over our standard length, if we're using that shorter length pitching wedge dedicated shaft to achieve that 1 inch over length, we're going to have to double soft step that whole set. So to achieve that certain frequency that golfer's fit for, normally they could be a stiff flex shaft that is required for their swing speed, we might put an extra stiff shaft and a double soft step for them, so it kind of balances out the firmer shaft for the heavier head weights just to achieve length.
So it's actually it's a plays like number. You know, the flex is an
Absolutely,
X, but it
that's the best
plays
way to
like
put it.
an
It
S.
plays like it, and
I think that's what a lot of, but again, going back to your average golfer, they come for a fitting, and they might get something that's over length or under length, and then they read the flex, and they're like, oh man, I'm totally not that flex on the manufacturer's website. Well, a lot of these things are just based off standard.
yes,
Whereas when you make these big manipulations, that things do slide around, and you might need a different flex to accommodate for that issue.
yeah, absolutely. And you nailed it with coming in for a fitting. Don't get scared seeing a flex on a shaft for your particular swing speed. What you think, head weight, length are big factors in determining what's going to be truly matched up for your swing speed.
Yeah, that plays like flex again.
Plays like flex, absolutely.
So okay, we've picked the products. We know what shafts we're using. We've weighted the heads. You generally speaking, especially for a tour pro, you're going to go through an SST pure process.
Correct.
Give us a little lowdown on that.
SST peering is basically finding the most consistent part of the shaft. So when you flex out the shaft, you don't want to see any oscillation. That shaft from the top of your swing down through impact, it could have oscillation. It rotates around in a little circle. So the SST peering machine will run a series of tests, rotate the shaft until it finds the best horizontal, most consistent part of the shaft. Typically, people are familiar with the terminology like spining, finding that spine, which is also the hardest part of the shaft. And once they found that spine for a right-handed or left-hand golfer, they would mark that shaft where the spine is and align it towards the golfer's target. So with technology, the SST machine factors in that hardest consistent part of the shaft, which sometimes isn't the spine. It's always finding its most consistent part. That technology, it rotates the shaft 90 degrees for us builders to put a line on that shaft. Once it goes through that test, that line will mark, and it'll make it easier for us to install. We'll put that line up square to the face, so you'd have to see a kind of a demonstration with the SST machine and process. And
we actually got a video on SST on our TikTok.
That's perfect. So
head
people can see
and
the machine and work. And
yeah.
but definitely imagine swinging a club and that shaft is rotating down into impact. You're going to get inconsistent marks on the face. And out of robot testing, shafts that are unpeered, you'll put face tape on a club, you will see that inconsistency on the face tape, versus you peer out that same shaft that gets a lot tighter and a lot more consistent in the same part of the face with a peered shaft.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go down a sales pitch road here, but we offer it as an option.
Absolutely.
Tour pros do it because it's their living. But here's what I would say. For a tour pro doing it, and you look at the list on the SST Pure website. There's some big names up there. These guys swing the golf club the best in the world. They make the most consistent actions, unbelievable golfers, and they still have that done to their product.
Absolutely.
So if
Why
you
take
think
a chance
of the average golfer who doesn't make the best swing, if that shaft, that product can perform a little more stable, a little more consistent, it just gives them a better chance of returning it. They haven't got the skill enough to manipulate the golf club to make it work. So I think the argument for the average golfer not needing SST Pure kind of goes out the window, as it's like, well, the average golfer actually needs the most consistent product because they don't make the most consistent swing.
Absolutely. I heard there was a study done with Tiger Woods that he was given 10 golf clubs, and two of the clubs were peered. The other 8 were not peered. They wanted to see if he could find those 2 clubs that were peered versus the non-peered, and I was told he found those 2. I still have yet to do the research to follow up on that, but don't quote me on that 100%. I've heard that from a couple reputable golfers in the business that that is something that you could believe Tiger could figure out with his sensitivity in his hands and just being one of the greatest of all time, if not the.
Well, let's keep that. Let's keep that as on the table as like something we'll mess around with. Okay, so the shafts are cured, they're weighed out. You've got the three components together. You're going to weigh the grips as well to make sure that you can
Absolutely.
balance the swing weight.
Yeah.
And then assembly. I mean, once you, that's all the hard work, right?
Yeah. The preparation in anything makes the product the best you can. If you put in the time and the work, weigh out everything. Assembly is going to be the easy part. Gluing up the shafts and setting the ferrules can be difficult too. If a customer wants a specific type of ferrule, that could be a story for another conversation.
Yeah.
Because ferrules, you have collared ferrules, different size ferrules. Installing some ferrules can crack on you. You can epoxy ferrules on to shafts before even installation. I don't know if you want to go down that road quite yet, but once the ferrules are put on, then yes, we'll epoxy the shafts onto the head. Wait for the drying process. Once the epoxy dries, we work with a really good 810 acrylic epoxy from 3M, and most of the tour vans, they use it. It will basically dry in about 10 minutes. You can hit shots probably another 20 minutes, and that head's not going anywhere off that shaft. So we can turn around a lot of clubs faster with that faster drying epoxy, and still knowing it can hold up with even some of the fastest swing speed, long drive golfers will come in here and never had one of their heads come off their shaft. So that's always a good sign there.
Excellent. Great. I mean, and then obviously you get feedback from your players to adjust. You might tinker with lie angles because, you know, sometimes the linear scale doesn't fit perfect. You might need to make an adjustment on a club to make it right for them. But, you know, that club building process is great. I think we should dig into, like you say, some good ideas. You talk about some ferrules and some issues. I know we got hosel sizes that can affect that. We should talk about some grip weights next time, maybe. We'll leave plenty in the tank, but thank you for talking us through that piece.
Yeah, no worries.
We'll get you back in a bunch, and we'll just keep letting people know about how we build golf clubs and the attention we pay to that detail.
Yeah, it's a fun process.
All right. Thanks, Matt. We'll get you
Thanks,
again.
Jack. Appreciate it.